You are officially invited. Yes, you. You're invited to join us in Fertility Awareness Mastery. This is my 10-week program designed to help you gain confidence using fertility awareness. Whether you're actively avoiding pregnancy or looking to optimize your cycles for conception, we have a spot for you. We start on October 9th. Are you ready to jump in? Head over to fertilityfriday.com/group program to reserve your spot today. That's fertilityfriday.com/group program. This is the Fertility Friday podcast, episode number 218. Welcome to the 218th episode of the Fertility Friday podcast. Thank you for joining me today. I'm Lisa from fertilityfriday.com, and this is your source for information about the fertility awareness method and all things fertility. I'm excited to share today's episode with you. In today's episode, we have another installment of my Pill Reality series. So for the past couple of years, I've been interviewing women who have had various experiences with hormonal birth control, different types of birth control, and just what their experience was on it, coming off of it. So in today's episode, we have another edition of that. If you are new to the podcast, or if this is perhaps the first episode of this series that you have listened to, you can head over to fertilityfriday.com/pillreality, and you'll see a list of all the previous episodes that we've done in the same topic. So these episodes are really interesting. Lots of interesting experiences come up. And I think it's important to note that, every woman does not have the same experience on hormonal birth control. Many women will, report that they didn't have any side effects or they didn't experience anything. Other women will say that they didn't really notice anything, but then when they came off, they noticed a big difference. So it's really individual. But I think it is important to provide the space for women to share the experiences that they had, because although every woman won't experience the same thing, it's important to know that, someone did experience this. And so I know that you'll appreciate today's episode. And I just want to thank Julia for being so open and also just so candid about her experience. So I know that some of you listening to the podcast, perhaps you found us because you were looking for alternatives. You were looking for information about the fertility awareness method. You were looking for information about how to successfully come off of hormonal birth control, even if you're not trying to get pregnant, and how you can feel comfortable and confident using fertility awareness to avoid pregnancy. And I know others listen to the podcast and then become inspired to perhaps actually try coming off of it. So if you are in either of those categories and you're looking just for some support to feel really confident about using fertility awareness as your primary method of birth control, what I want you to know is that it is possible. It is possible to use fertility awareness effectively to avoid pregnancy, especially when you learn from a trained instructor. There are studies that have been done that show the effectiveness up to 99.4%. So, but in order to achieve that level of confidence and that level of efficacy, it is really important to have that additional support, someone there that you can ask all your questions to, and so that you can be really clear on how this all works and how to be successful with the method. And so you heard at the top of the episode that registration is now open for the next round of Fertility Awareness Mastery. So we will be starting in a couple of months. We'll be meeting for 10 weeks, 10 consecutive weeks. I've nailed down the dates. So we're going to start on October the 9th. And we're going to go consecutively 10 weeks until I think it's December 11th. So I'd love to have you in there. Make sure to head over to fertilityfriday.com/group program. I'm planning to do one group. So that means that there are limited spots available. And so if you want to, grab a spot, make sure that we have a spot for you. Make sure to apply early so that we can save your spot. So again, that's fertilityfriday.com/group program. Now let's jump into today's episode. So I'm really excited to be here today with Julia. So Julia is a member of the Fertility Friday Facebook community. And recently I posed a question in the group about side effects of birth control. And Julia, when you shared your side effects, I reached out to you pretty much immediately and invited you to be on the show. For a number of reasons. As I mentioned in the pre-chat, of course, one of the reasons is just that I was horrified, naturally. But another one of the reasons is because as women, we're very prone to say, okay, this couldn't happen to me. Even if we read the side effects, even if we're aware of the side effects, no one thinks they're going to have the worst ones, but you did. So
Absolutely.
yeah, so maybe we could just start, just maybe share with us how old you were when you had your first period and kind of when you first started taking hormonal birth control, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, sure. So my name's Julia. I had my first period when I was about 10, maybe 11. I'm a woman of color, so I was kind of expecting that it would come early. And I definitely was, one of my first friends to have experienced my period. I remember it happening in elementary school and being like kind of confused, and then coming home and my mom explaining to me what was going on. So that was that. I was pretty young, and then didn't think about birth control at all until I was maybe about 17. And, my periods were kind of all over the place, kind of painful. And I didn't really know kind of what could be a better solution. I had a much older sister that was about 9 years older than me. And it was much easier for me to kind of talk to her about this kind of stuff. So she offered to go to the gynecologist with me. And then, of course, when I was like, oh, it's painful and kind of irregular, he was like, oh, birth control can fix that. So I was about to turn 18, I think, when I first started taking birth control. And I did hormonal birth control. The first one I was prescribed, I believe, was orthotricycline low. And so, I filled my prescription and went off to college, took that for about a year. And then when it was time for me to kind of, get another annual PAP and renew my birth control prescription at the university healthcare center, the physician that I saw then was kind of suggested that I try a different birth control. And I don't actually really remember kind of the history of why that was suggested, but it was at that point that I switched to, I believe it was Yasmin. Yaz or Yasmin, but I'm pretty sure it was Yasmin. And then I took that for about another year. And basically, so I was a sophomore at university, at college, and I was getting very bad headaches that I noticed. And they were just kind of like getting worse, and they were pretty inexplicable. I had never had a headache like that. That was kind of so persistent. I had struggled with like some anemia when I was younger, and that would, sometimes kind of make me feel fatigued or weak or have a dull headache. But this was kind of like way out of that range. So I went to the healthcare center and reported my symptoms, and I was very minimized when I was, going to that doctor. They're like, oh, it's a headache, whatever, no big deal. But it was so debilitating. So I just kept going back, every couple of weeks, like, this headache isn't going away. This headache isn't going away. I was like eating so much Advil just to walk to class in the morning. And it was terrible. And it was like just nothing I had experienced before. So after, I'd probably say a couple months of going through that, I went home for spring break. I'm from New Orleans, Louisiana. I went to college out in California. So I flew home for spring break and was home for about a week, sick, throwing up, in so much pain the whole time. I didn't really want to go to the hospital. I didn't know what was wrong. And I felt like I had been so dismissed by doctors already. So I just kind of suffered through it. And then after that, I flew back to college. And I remember the day that I flew back, I was in so much pain that, my friend just drove me straight to the emergency room. And so they did an examination at the emergency room and kind of concluded that they were pretty sure that something was wrong, but that I needed a referral from my primary care doctor before they could do like any follow-up testing. So
Wow.
that's just like, yeah. So that's like a lovely side note about like American healthcare, right? So
Deep breath.
So they were like, they discharged me. They gave me some medication to kind of like help with the nausea, because I was in so much pain that I was kind of, really sick that evening.
And this is pain from like your head. Is this like headache pain, or is this different kind of?
Yes. So it was a headache pain. Yeah, it was headache pain, but it was just like so jarring. Like, you could feel like your head throbbing when you walk, that kind of headache pain. And it was like nothing would kind of relieve it. So yeah, so I didn't really know what else to do. So, so they discharged me, tell me to, call the doctor the next day and then, go through the proper channels to see a specialist and get follow-up testing. Needless to say, I didn't make it to the doctor the next day because I went home, I took my, nausea medication, went to sleep, and I woke up in the middle of the night and I really needed to use the bathroom and noticed that I couldn't move my left leg. Luckily, my partner at the time was with me. So I woke her up and I asked her to bring me to the bathroom. And it was the middle of the night. We were both super confused by what was going on. But, she helped me get to the bathroom and then we laid back down. And then a few hours later, the alarm goes off and she was like, hey, you mentioned you couldn't move your left leg. Is that still the case? And I was like, oh, actually, yeah, it is. And she's like, okay, well, we need to go to the hospital right now. So then we immediately went to the emergency room. Really, the last thing I remember at that point was kind of calling my mom and telling her, like, something's wrong. I'm at the hospital. I told her that, my partner would call her when we had more information. And then I lost consciousness. So I don't really remember anything, but I've been told what had happened after that, which was basically that when they saw kind of how I had lost consciousness, how I was non-responsive, they finally, ran some scans and basically found a blood clot in one of the sinuses in my brain. This resulted in them having to basically do an injection to break up the clot. And it didn't totally break it up enough to kind of have it dissolve on its own. So they had to do a procedure with a catheter where they put a catheter in through my groin. I was, unconscious for all this. I just heard about it later. But and then they hiked the catheter up and removed the chunks of the blood clot to kind of relieve the sinus so that oxygen can flow back through your brain. All this happens. And in the meantime, the doctors are calling my mom in Louisiana and saying, we're not sure if she'll make it. You should come be here. So she flew like really quick. And my poor mom, my sister's the one who brought me to the gynecologist. My mom didn't even know I was on birth control. She was just like, it was a barrage of information for her, but she flew out to California to be in the hospital with me. Basically the next 24 hours, I was kind of like in a coma state because I wasn't waking up and I was non-responsive and all that. And there was a lot of swelling around my brain because of, the procedure and what had happened. And then when I did finally wake up, they had to intubate me because I was not like breathing on my own. I was, on a ventilator for a few days and in the ICU for a few days. And then they moved me down into a different wing of the hospital where I was doing kind of intense physical therapy for about the next 5 or 6 weeks. So I was in the hospital for close to 2 months, but I didn't have any brain damage. So I was able to regain all of the function, all of my motor function and all my cognitive function. But they did a full like clotting workup panel and I was, very young, not overweight, not a smoker. So they said the only thing they could contribute it to was most likely taking hormonal birth control. So that's my story.
Wow. And how old were you at the time?
Yeah, so I was 19 when that happened. It was April of 2005, so 19 years old, yeah.
So the listeners can't see my face, but Julie, you see my face because I just want to like scream. But yeah. I'm going to try to relax.
Yeah, it's horrifying for me to think back about how young I was. Yeah, very young.
Well, and do you mind me asking, how old are you now?
I am 32 now.
Okay, so this happened like long enough ago so it's not like...
Yeah, it was about 13 years ago at this point.
Well, there's a lot to unpack in your story. Well, first of all, thank you for taking us through your story. It is horrifying on so many levels.
Yeah, I agree.
So like to kind of unpack it, I mean, interesting that you, even from the very beginning when you were switched to a different birth control method, a lot of women are switched to different birth control methods because they're having an issue, like a specific issue. Like that's very, very common. But in your case, it doesn't seem like that was really the case. So you were kind of switched because of your practitioner's preference, most likely.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. I don't remember having any complaints at that point in time that would have prompted a switch. It sounded like the practitioner thought that was a better choice for me for whatever reason.
Well, and the other aspects of your story that are obviously concerning are that you did have, it sounds like you had migraines
Right.
full on because I'm not a, specialist in migraines or anything, but migraines are different to a regular headache in that typically regular medication doesn't touch them.
Right.
And you feel like it hurts so bad. It feels kind of like you're having an aneurysm, like it feels like something's wrong in your brain when you have a migraine, depending on how severe it is. And often, I've heard women say, like, for even a day or so after the migraine, they're exhausted, and it's almost like their brain is
Mhm.
sore after.
Yeah, and so I had never had headaches like that, so I really didn't know like what to compare it to. But yeah, I mean, I tried to like exactly describe that to the doctor, that it was just like, you know, throbbing. I like, it was so hard for me to get to class, so hard for me to like read, and so debilitating. But yeah, it was just highly minimized when I went in with that kind of explanation about my pain.
Yeah. Well, and that's a problem, given especially that hormonal birth control is associated with some women do get headaches, and of course it is associated with blood clots and strokes. So, for one of the things that is disturbing to me about your story as well is that at least doctors may not be briefed on to the to a large extent about all the side effects in great detail, but the big side effects they are. So,
Yeah.
but I think in the literature that's meant for doctors, often it's like if the person is smoking or overweight or over a certain age, then that's the only time they really worry about the stroke risk factor. And so, being 19, fairly healthy, young, thin, not having those risk factors, I just, anyways, there's just a part of me that just thinks like, well, given knowing what I know today, if I was in that situation, if a woman was having headaches shortly after switching birth control methods, for me that's a huge flag, but for some reason for the doctor it was not.
Right. Exactly.
Well, and then of course, like the other disturbing part is that you actually ended up at the hospital and they sent you home, which is,
Right.
um,
Yeah.
yeah. So take us through. You took us through like one of the most likely horrific kind of events of your life in just a couple short minutes. But you mentioned that after, so they did the procedure. It still took about 2 months to recover. So maybe take us through that a little bit. You mentioned that you went. I mean, when at the time that you went to the hospital, you couldn't move one of your legs. So maybe take us through what actually had to happen in order for you to regain full use of your legs again.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So it was actually it was all my whole left side, so it was my arm as well. I just didn't like notice that at first. And so basically they moved me down into the intensive rehab unit of the hospital. So many, people who have had strokes are there, older people who might have had a fall that they're recovering from where they need like really intense rehab and therapy, are located on that unit. So that's where I was for the majority of my time at the hospital once I was no longer kind of in critical condition. And so they worked with several different therapists every day. Their protocol was that you would have at least 3 hours of therapy every day. And it was usually 1 hour of speech therapy. So they would, be working to make sure that your cognitive function was still kind of intact. And then 1 hour of occupational therapy to work on like fine motor skills. So, things like, moving a pen into a drawer or like smaller tasks that you might, not have had the same function to do. And then physical therapy, which was working on kind of the bigger task of like actually taking steps and walking upstairs and kind of regaining some of that strength in your muscles. The thing that was really kind of surprising to me was that, the first, I guess, probably 2 to 3 weeks that I was in the hospital, I really wasn't able to move much. Like they couldn't let me stand up. I couldn't stand up on my own and I couldn't take any steps or anything like that. So I was mostly in the bed all the time. And unless they, they moved me to the wheelchair to take a walk down the hallway or something like that. But I wasn't really moving my legs or my muscles on my own. And even in that short amount of time, just my muscles were so weak. And so doing physical therapy was exhausting just for an hour to like, sit with a therapist and have him or her like, help me kind of like flex my legs or try and, stand up. It was just exhausting. So I was doing that, at least 3 hours a day, every day for about, I would say probably like maybe 5 or 6 weeks. And then what the doctors and the therapists told me was that because the clot didn't totally obstruct my sinus in the brain, there was oxygen kind of moving around it, and it was caught quickly enough and like broken up quickly enough that I didn't have brain damage. So that was kind of one of the main reasons that I think I was able to fully regain all of my function. And so, so that was kind of, one of the main things and they said because I was young as well, that like the brain kind of is a little bit more flexible, perhaps. So, I mean, but there was definitely a period of time that I was like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to walk again. Like that was a real thought that I had when I was 19. And I didn't even know how to ask that question because it was like so scary to me. Yeah, it definitely, it was exhausting and it took a lot of time. And I did essentially have to, relearn how to walk and how to climb stairs and that kind of thing. And so I kind of got those broad strokes down while I was in the hospital before I was discharged. But then, for the next 6 months, I was just in physical therapy pretty continuously, outpatient. So it was more like once or twice a week. But I just had a lot of weakness that I kind of had to work on. So that was kind of ongoing. And then to this day, 13 years later, I still have a lot of like chronic shoulder pain on my left side because of what happened. And essentially doctors have explained and physical therapists have explained that when I was kind of regaining motion, that my shoulder muscles were helping to hold up my head, which is not what they're typically meant to do. It's pretty strenuous for them. It really kind of seized up and tightened, and they've never kind of relearned exactly what their function is. So it gets very tight and very painful pretty easily. So that's kind of an ongoing thing that I still deal with. But otherwise, I am able to walk and run and have all that function back. But it took a little while to get there for sure.
Well, what was going through your mind? I mean, 19, so young, in the middle of university, probably thinking about like, how am I going to get my, like how am I going to finish out this semester, which likely didn't happen. But what was going through your mind at that time?
Yeah, I actually, that was probably my primary concern was like, oh, I have to go to class. And to the point where like I was like so dogmatic about it, to the point where like one of my good friends was visiting me, and I asked her like, bring me my reading assignments. And she's like, you were so adamant that I thought that I was wrong and you were going back to class. So it took over like the social workers and the nurses to kind of like convince me that, it was going to be okay to like miss that semester. So yeah, I was really concerned about, missing class. I was definitely concerned about that. I was concerned about my health, but I didn't really understand at that point kind of what all the ramifications were. I didn't know how long it would take to have physical function. I didn't know kind of like what medication I would have to be on after that. Yeah, I didn't really have a sense of it. And I honestly, I didn't know what questions to ask at that time, at that age. There might be some teenagers who kind of are more medically savvy, but I had never been in a situation where I had to know kind of what to ask and those types of questions. So yeah, I was definitely concerned, but I didn't know how to voice that concern. And so I just kind of was waiting around to get more information as it was given to me.
Yeah. Well, talking to you now, just seeing you, via Zoom, you'd have no idea that you went through something like that. And it just breaks my heart that you had to go through that. So now coming out on the other end, and for all the women who are listening, I mean, when you learn about the birth control pill and the side effects, I mean, even when I was a teenager, I knew that was one of the side effects because that's the one they talk about. Stroke and blood clots, deep vein thrombosis. But you just literally never think that it would ever happen to you. Did you even know that was a side effect of the pill at the time?
Yeah. So I do remember I remember all the commercials that they always list that one. And I do remember the doctor kind of asking about any history in our family of blood clotting or strokes, which we had none. I think it was on my radar that that was a possible side effect, but I had no kind of like concept of it being like, it was my understanding that it was like, it happened to so few people that it wasn't like a real thing that I needed to be concerned about, to the point where like when I woke up in the hospital, I was shocked when my mom said, oh, they think this was because of hormonal birth control. And I was like, really? I thought it was just like a headache. So yeah, I mean, I think it was kind of on my radar, but it had no idea that it would have kind of like led to this essentially.
Well, and then after this all happened, how did you manage your fertility kind of moving forward?
Yes. So, well, one of the main things was that they were really concerned about potential clotting going forward. So I had to take a blood thinner for several years after I was discharged, which is called Coumadin or warfarin. And it basically helps to make sure that your blood doesn't clot or thicken. So I was on that for about 3 years, and they originally said I would need to be on it for the rest of my life. And my mom was like, that's not going to happen. So with some advocacy, we worked with a hematologist who actually kind of looked at my case a little closer. And she said that as long as I, never took hormonal birth control, never had like an increase in estrogen like that again, that it would be okay to stop taking Coumadin. So I stopped that about 3 years after. And then in the intervening time after I was discharged from the hospital until I was about 28, I had female partners. So I actually wasn't worried about birth control. I mean, it just kind of worked out that way that I didn't have to take the time to educate myself about other ways to manage my fertility, since I just wasn't in a position that I would accidentally be getting pregnant. I mean, I do wish that I would have taken the time to understand that better, but I felt like I just didn't know about any of those resources. I honestly didn't know about FAM until I found your podcast. So, and that was, about a year ago. Then when I'm married to a male partner now. And so when I met him, I kind of had to revisit birth control. And so when I talked to, my doctor at the time, who knew my history with hormonal birth control and that hormones weren't an option for me, she suggested the copper IUD, the Paragard. So I had that for a couple of years, maybe 3. And that actually, it worked fine enough for me. It made my periods much heavier and more painful. I would not get one again, but I didn't have, nothing like a blood clot in my head.
Yeah.
In
This
comparison.
is okay. Yes.
Yeah,
In comparison.
exactly. About a year ago, I removed my IUD because we were trying to conceive. So yeah, that's kind of been my like fertility journey since, getting off of hormonal birth control.
Well, and so given that you had like the worst case scenario in terms of like the worst side effect that none of us ever think could happen to them, like what are your feelings about the pill now? Like how do you, when you were having conversations with your girlfriends or kind of throughout your life now, 13 years later, how do you talk about hormonal birth control?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely, I do want to be clear that like when I was 17, like I was seeking out the pill. I knew that was a possible solution for, the pain or the irregular periods. So when the doctor suggested it, there's no pushback for me. It's not like I had, and I didn't know any options. So I was like, yeah, absolutely. This sounds great. Everyone's on the pill. But now, of course, after having this experience, I kind of feel like it's poison, which I know is not how, I mean, not everyone has a bad experience on hormonal birth control. And I know that, and I acknowledge that. And a lot of my friends are on it or have been on it for many years. And, they have no complaints. So I try to be very respectful about that whenever I do have conversations with other people about, fertility or about their contraceptive methods. But I also, I definitely tell everybody about what happened to me just because like, it's crazy. And I feel like it was very formative for me. So it's just like kind of a part of getting to know me if you're a close friend of mine, but also like, I was shocked that that was a real risk or side effect that would materialize that way. So I do definitely tell people about what happened to me for sure.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's part of the reason why I wanted to have you on the show, because I wanted to give you the opportunity to share your experience and just to, because you're like, you're a real person who had this experience. And we all know that,
Right.
most women don't have this experience. So it's not like anyone listening to this thinks that every single person who takes hormonal birth control is going to have this experience. But at the same time, like when you have like chicken for dinner, like you don't end up with a stroke in the hospital with like 6 months of rehabilitation, right? So we have to acknowledge that there's something going on and that this is a possibility. And yeah, I'm glad that you made it.
Thank you. And
I'm glad that you're still here with us. Holy cow.
Yeah, no, and I do every year when that anniversary rolls around, I do kind of like, think about that like, wow, that was 13 years ago. And like, here I am, and I've done a whole lot of things since then. But the one other thing that I did want to mention when you were asking about how I've managed my fertility since then was that I was instructed that if I ever got pregnant, that I would have to anticoagulate through my pregnancy because of the increase in estrogen. And so I'm currently about 17 weeks pregnant. And so I have been giving myself injections every day. So that's kind of an ongoing side effect that I do manage now.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I appreciate you sharing that, because in your case, this happened, but there's still certain effects that linger. So you mentioned the kind of the shoulder pain, as well as having to always be really mindful of all these potential risk factors, just because knowing that happened once means that all through and I think even a friend of mine had it's not the same thing, but she had a clot like in her leg during pregnancy, and yeah, it's really serious. There was a lot of things that she had to do to manage that. And also it continued after, because as you mentioned, she had to kind of continue taking blood thinners for a while to manage that. So yeah, really serious. This is like as serious as it gets. And one thing that I find interesting as well is that your like, I think I had, because I have, I know a lot of women who use FAM, and like, so as you can imagine, I'm in these conversations quite a bit, but your friends who are closest to you, who know this happened to you, still take the pill, because even though like they know somebody who it happened to and they know that it can really happen, we still think it could never happen to me.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, so even that, and I remember having a conversation with a friend of mine, and she was like, actually, I know someone who had like a blood clot on the pill. And it only was in that conversation that she realized that she was like, oh yeah, wow. Yeah, I even know somebody who that happened to, but somehow I never ever thought it could happen to me, even though I know somebody. So, so now the listeners know somebody who this has happened to.
Yes.
Well, thank you for being on the show, Julia. I mean, any words of encouragement or just anything for the listeners of the podcast who are kind of taking their jaw off the floor and kind of trying to process what they just heard?
Yeah, I would think the one thing that I think I really try and remind friends and other women that I talk to is that, like, you are the expert in your body. And like, I knew something was wrong with me when I was having those headaches. It was very unusual for me. It was pain that I knew was not normal and that I had never experienced before. But I didn't know how to advocate for myself with the doctor that I was seeing. And so I really felt kind of like bullied into feeling like I was overreacting or exaggerating. So I just encouraged women to just like, when that happens, find another doctor. And I didn't know to do that. I didn't know any of that. I didn't trust that I was the expert in my body, but really you are. So that's kind of what I think. I carry that with me to this day. I'm like so selective when I'm working with practitioners. So yeah.
Well, those are amazing words to end on. I really appreciate you saying that. And I mean, in your case, it was obviously like this acute life-threatening situation, and still they weren't paying attention. But this kind of thing plays out all the time, whether it's period pain or, if your menstrual cycle is irregular and you're concerned about it, or just, woman after woman over the years, I've spoken to so many women, and it's kind of like a shared experience of being female, like not being listened to by medical providers.
Yeah.
So I couldn't echo that more strongly. And I wouldn't want anyone coming from the podcast thinking that unless it's like life threatening, that's when it matters, because it all matters.
Yeah.
Even if it's like a rash on
absolutely.
your arm that's not going away, like it all matters. We deserve to be taken seriously.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think women's pain is like minimized all the time, and it's just totally unfair and inappropriate and not good care. So yeah, I totally agree. It all needs to be taken seriously.
Absolutely. Well, I could talk to you all day, but I'm going to respect your time. But I really appreciate you coming on the show, Julia. I mean, you really shared kind of like one of the darkest moments in your life with us. And for me, it's all about education and giving women a place to actually share these experiences so we can hear them, because we need to hear them. Like we needed to hear that you, Julia, had this experience so that we know that it's real, so that we know that there are real women who are being affected by this in a negative way. And what I always say is that I don't share this because I believe that no one should ever use the pill. I've used the pill. You've used the pill. Like 85% of women in North America have used the pill. So this is not about like pill shaming or anything. It's more just my firm belief about it is that if we all knew all of the side effects and all of the possibilities and all of those types of things, and if our doctors were informed, but even either way, if we knew, then we would be able to just make more informed choices. So if you had really been properly counseled about this, or if your doctor had been more kind of actively monitoring you for possible side effects, then this may have still happened, but it may have been caught a little bit sooner.
Absolutely.
Or you may have had a little bit more agency to say, no, I read about the stroke thing and I am concerned about this headache. I mean, all it is giving us more of a voice and an ability to advocate for us and make informed choices about what we do, about the medication that we're taking. So thank you so much.
Having the information is so important. I totally agree. And thank you for everything you do, Lisa. Like, I've learned so much from you, and I really appreciate that.
Oh, thanks so much, Julia. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please share it with a friend. You'll find the show notes page for today's episode over at fertilityfriday.com/218. I hope that you enjoyed my episode with Julia. It was my pleasure to have her on the show and give her an opportunity to share her story. To be honest with you, I had to take a minute. After we recorded this episode, I had to sit down and just sit with my thoughts for a couple of minutes because I just had so many emotions. All the feels were coming up for me. It really affects me to hear about a woman who has to go through something this serious, all because she was looking for a birth control method. And this is just something that is near and dear to my heart. And I just really get upset at the injustice of it all, to be super dramatic. But it really upsets me just to know that women are suffering. And in a big part of it is that we're suffering because we're not always provided with full and accurate information that would allow us to make informed choices about our health and about our fertility. So as I always say, I share these episodes about hormonal birth control. I've done a number of my pill reality series, as I've called them, but I've done a number of these episodes. And the reason isn't to say that no woman should ever use the pill, although I would like to say that, but I don't. I've used the pill. And similar to Julia's story, I initially went on the pill when I was in my teens because I had painful periods. And that was what helped me to manage them at that age. I didn't know anything else. I was not given any other options, alternatives. So the pill greatly reduced my period volume and also pain. And it allowed me to play sports and do all kinds of stuff. But with that said, looking back, I often wonder, because I know that my emotions were totally all over the place during that time. And it's only now as a grown woman, I look back and wonder how much the pill played in that, like what the role of the pill was in terms of my hormonal ups and downs and emotional things that were going on there. And I also, as I was listening to Julia's story, it actually reminded me that when I was on the pill as a teenager, that's the only time in my life that I've ever actually had migraines. So I actually had migraines a couple of times when I was on the pill. And I remember my doctor giving me these really huge pills, painkillers, to address the pain. And ever since then, I have never had another one. So I often wonder about that. So make sure to join us in the Fertility Friday Facebook community. We'll be talking about this episode. We'll be talking about hormonal birth control. And I'd like to hear what your experience was like, whether your experience was positive, negative, neutral. We'll be talking more about that. So head over to fertilityfriday.com/community and join us in there for a conversation about hormonal birth control. And also for more episodes in the Pill Reality series, make sure to head over to fertilityfriday.com/pillreality. And so those are the episodes specifically where I've been interviewing members of the Fertility Friday community and just providing a space to hear their experiences on hormonal birth control. So whether you are planning to come off of hormonal birth control, or if you have never used it before, or if you have recently come off and you're looking for a reliable and effective method of non-hormonal birth control, make sure to head over to fertilityfriday.com/group program for more information about the 10-week Fertility Awareness Mastery group program. And so typically we have about 6 to 8 women in the group, and we spend 10 weeks diving deep into fertility awareness. So by the end of the program, you are good to go. Whether you are planning to avoid pregnancy, you'll be very confident using the method for birth control. With a 10-week program, we go through about 3 charts together, 3 full charts. And so it really gives you time to learn the method, but also to practice and also to learn from the other women in the group. So it's a really great and unique opportunity just to learn the method, but not learn it just by yourself. So you get to learn it in a supportive group of women who are in a similar stage, and also, of course, with instruction from me. So again, fertilityfriday.com/group program. And I just want to thank you for spending some time with me today, for tuning into the show. I appreciate all of you for spreading the word and sharing the show with your friends. You know, this community is incredible. And when I first started this podcast, I had no idea that it would grow to what it is today. So I really appreciate all of you for supporting the show and sharing it. You know, that's really how we're going to get the word out about fertility awareness, just one woman at a time. So until next time, be well and happy charting.